Hey bag ladies and bag dudes, I'm Sarah Lawson from Sew Sweetness, and today I'm going to show you how to make this Hexi Zipper Pouch. If you've never done any English paper piecing before, hexagons are the perfect project to get started with. I like to prepare these little guys in advance of a trip or before my kids' swimming lesson because it's a great project for on the go. And I just use a bit of fusible applique paper, and I love this paper by Hugs and Kisses. And the papers combined with a little bit of glue stick is all you need to prep these pieces, and then they're ready to sew. So grab your supplies and let's get started. Okay, before we start cutting out fabric and interfacing, you'll need to print off the PDF pattern, and this is the page that has the two templates that you'll need. So you want to always open up the pattern file using Adobe Reader. You don't want to open it up using a web browser. And Adobe Reader is a free program that you can download to your device if you don't already have it. And you always want to print out at actual size. So you don't want to scale or fit to page. It needs to be actual size, and there's two little test squares on the page, a 1 inch square and a 4 centimeter square. And you want to measure either of those squares to make sure that they measure exactly either 1 inch or the 4 centimeters. If they're measuring either slightly smaller or slightly larger, then that means that your templates did not print out correctly. Okay, so once we've got these printed out, we're going to cut to the outside of the black line. Okay, so this is the main panel. We'll need this to cut out from fabric and interfacing. And also this template right here is for cutting out all of your fabric hexagons. And again, we're going to be cutting to the outside of the black line. Okay, so for cutting out the hexagons, if you just want to have hexagons on the front of your pouch, you'll need to cut out 27 of these from fabric. And I've got 2 over here cut from fabric just so that you can see what they look like. And the very last page of the pattern template is meant to print out these smaller hexagons, and these are for attaching to the back of your fabric using the fusible. So I've used fusible applique paper, and I just printed this file on the side of the paper that is not the adhesive. So this side right here is the shiny side. I'm not printing on this side, I'm just printing on the plain side without the adhesive. And you'll need to print out 2 of these pages to cover the 27 hexagons. And once you've cut those out, this is what they should look like. Okay, so let me show you how to attach the lining fabric to the interfacing. So I've got one of my lining main panels, and I've also cut out Pellon Shapeflex interfacing. So one side of the Shapeflex feels bumpy to your fingers. That's the side with the adhesive that will go against the wrong side of the fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this so that the design is face down, and the adhesive is going to go against the wrong side of the fabric. Okay, I'm going to take my iron. My iron is at the cotton setting, and I'm just going to glide the iron over all of the areas of the fabric for a few seconds. You don't want to just plonk your iron down. Just keep it moving so that you don't have a big iron imprint on your fabric when you're finished. And you always want to test to verify that your interfacing is properly attached before you stop ironing. And I usually recommend using a pressing cloth, but for these videos I don't, just so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so I'm just going to take my fingernail and try to peel back a corner of the interfacing, and if I can't do it, then you've ironed it long enough, and if it's coming apart, then just iron it a little bit longer. So you should have 2 of these main panels attached to Shapeflex interfacing, and you should also have 2 main panels cut from foam interfacing. Also, if you prefer to use fleece or batting, that'll be okay too, but we're not attaching any fabric to these 2 pieces just yet. Okay, so let's move over and let me show you how to attach your hexagon fusible paper to the back of the fabric. Okay, so now we're going to iron these fusible applique papers to the wrong side of the fabric hexagons. Okay, so I'm just going to flip this so that it's face down and do the best you can to center that paper on the wrong side of the fabric. No need to measure it, just eyeballing the center is fine. And I'm just going to take my iron and fuse that in place. Okay, and you'll repeat this same process with all 27 of your hexagons. And then I'm going to break out the glue stick and show you how to glue the corners down of the fabric. So I'm using this Fons & Porter washable glue stick. I like it because it's about a 1/2 inch in thickness, and it's great for gluing small areas. Also, the glue before it dries stays blue so you can see where you're gluing. And I also like using these refill packs once I run out of the glue that comes with the pen. Okay, so let me show you how to glue this. We're going to be gluing one side at a time. Try to leave yourself a little bit of room before you hit the black line so that you're not gluing all the way to the black line or higher up on the fabric. I'm just going to go ahead and take this and place some glue right across it, and I'm going to fold the fabric down so that it covers the edge of the paper, and then just take my iron and set the glue. Okay, I'm going to work my way around all of the edges. A nice thing about this fusible applique paper is that it's water soluble, so that means when your project is finished, you can either spritz the back of the hexagons using a spray bottle and the paper will disintegrate, or when you've completely finished your project, you can put it in the washing machine and that'll also disintegrate the papers, or you can just leave the papers in and it'll just provide a bit of extra stability to the project. So it's up to you. I've done all of those 3 methods before and I don't see a problem with either of them, so just your personal preference, what you want to do with the hexagons when your project is finished. Another thing that I wanted to note about this glue stick is I try to rotate ironing my project on my ironing board, because once a certain spot on the ironing board gets really hot, the glue stick sort of dries as soon as it hits the project. So if you're using a particular spot in your ironing board, you might want to just sort of rotate so you're getting a cool spot of the ironing board for each hexagon or something like that. So you'll repeat this same process for all 27 of the hexagons to attach them to the paper. Okay, so now it's time to start sewing these hexagons together. So when I first started English paper piecing years ago, the technique that I used was to use cardstock papers to attach the hexagons and then baste with thread the corners to hold the cardstock in place. And I had a hard time with that because my cardstock was shifting. That's why I like using these fusible papers, because as a bag maker, I'm used to using lots of interfacing that I fuse in place. And so these fusible applique papers sort of remind me of that whole process of attaching fabric to interfacing for bag making. So if you prefer to use the cardstock instead, that's completely fine with me. I'm going to use these tulip applique needles. These are number 10 big eye needles. And I'm using 60 weight polyester thread. These are by Superior Threads. If you have a different preference, that's also fine. And you'll want to, as close as possible, match your thread colors if you can to the project. So I'm just going to use sort of a silver colored thread because it kind of matches the light colors in this fabric. And you can either use an automatic needle threader or you can thread your needle by hand. So I often thread mine by hand. And there's a fantastic craftsy class by Helen Stubbings. I highly recommend it. So if you're interested in this video today and you want to explore more with English paper piecing, check out the craftsy class by Helen Stubbings. There's lots of great projects and information in the class, and I'll link to that in this video description. So I'm going to thread my needle. I just sort of like to pinch the thread between my fingers and pull it through. And I'm going to tie a knot at one end of my thread. I'm just looping that around the pointed end of the needle about 8 times and then pulling my knot down. So I've just got this tiny knot over here and I'm going to trim the little tail on that end of the thread. Okay, so let's get these sewn. I'm going to sew them right sides together, so that means I'm going to flip them down, and you want to always make sure that your corners are aligned. So if you have a little bit of extra fabric in the middle, that's fine because that'll go away as we sew the center of the piece. But I always like to use a wonder clip to hold the one end down, and as I get closer to the clip, I'll just remove it. Okay, so let me show you how to start off the hand sewing. So I'm going to start at this end. Again, I'm pinching so that the two corners are aligned. And I'm just going to come through the corners, just grabbing a small amount of the fabric. The more you grab, the more visible your stitches will be. So there I've just grabbed a small amount of the fabric, and I'm going to push the needle through until it hits the knot. Okay, so I'm going to come through that corner 2 more times, and I'm going to knot as I come through. Okay, so as I start to pull that thread through, I'm going to bring the needle through the loop, and that'll create a knot. So I'm going to do that one more time. And you always want to make your knots at the start and the end of a line of stitches, just so that things don't accidentally begin to unravel. Okay, one more knot. Okay, so time to start stitching. So I'm going to stitch about every little bit more than 1/8 of an inch, and I'm just going to grab as little fabric as possible. So you don't want to just grab one thread of the fabric. You want to make sure you have at least a little bit of the fabric coming through the needle. Hopefully you can see my needle right there, and I'll flip it to the other side as well so you can see that. So I'm just grabbing a little chunk of the fabric in the needle. And practice makes perfect. If this is your first time doing some English paper piecing, just do the best you can and it'll get better. So about 1/4 of an inch, I'm going to come through the fabric again. And because this superior thread is a polyester thread, you can use cotton thread as well, but I feel like I'm a little bit heavy-handed when pulling my needle through. Okay, so I'm just going to keep coming from the back side and just pushing the needle through. And like I said, just grab the smallest amount of fabric in your needle possible. If you see just one little thread of the fabric in your needle, that's not enough, so just go back and try to grab a little bit more. Okay, I'm going to move my wonder clip out of the way and finish the rest of the line. And the nice thing about English paper piecing is, especially in the summer when my kids have swimming lessons, I prep a lot of these hexagon pieces with the interfacing and the glue stick. And then when we go to the pool, I have all my pieces ready for hand sewing. Okay, I'm coming through the very end of the corner, and just like I did at the beginning, I'm gonna come through the loop, and that'll tie one knot, and then I'm gonna do one more second knot. Okay, so that's the process for just attaching 2 hexagons along a straight edge like this. And I'm also going to show you how to attach them where the edge is sort of curved, like right here. So I'm going to show you how to attach that next. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how to hand sew the hexagons in an area where there's more than one side, like this. Okay, so I'm going to start by sewing this edge over here, and I've got my needle and thread already knotted. So I'm going to start by sewing this edge right here, right sides together, and again I'm going to put my wonder clip on the far side. Okay, so you're going to repeat this same process for the remaining 3 edges of the hexagon. So for this next edge right here, I'm just going to fold the purple rabbit fabric and sew this edge, and then I'll do this edge right here, and then finally I'll finish with the 3rd edge right here. Okay, so you'll want to sew enough hexagons together so that you can completely cover the foam main panels. So when I finish doing that, I'm just going to go ahead and give it a press with my iron to make everything flat. And you might want to consider pausing just so you can see the layout of how I've laid mine out. I actually originally thought that I'd only need 27 hexagons, but when I finished my piece and I laid it on top of the foam main panel, I found that I needed to add 1 more. So I added this 1 more over here. So again, a friendly reminder, you can sew these hexagons together in whichever manner that you prefer. If you prefer to sew them in rows first and then attach the rows like this, you can do that. I just sort of added 1 at a time, so I didn't have a specific method for adding them. I would just add however I wanted to, and it doesn't matter as long as you're always stitching through twice on each corner to sew the knot, and then same thing when you reach the other corner. The knots are really important just so your stitching does not come undone. But this is what it should look like when you have all of the pieces assembled. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out that foam main panel piece, and I'm going to lay my completed hexagons on top. I'm just going to give it 1 more press. And then I'm actually going to keep my fingers on both the layers and flip to the wrong side. So what I'm going to do is take some wonder clips, and you can use some pins also if you prefer. I'm just going to place some wonder clips around the perimeter. What I'm going to do is take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew from the wrong side of the foam, and I'm going to sew using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance around the entire outer edge to secure the hexagons to the foam, and then I can come back and trim any excess hexagons that are sticking out past the foam. Okay, so I have my stitch length set to 4 millimeters because we're just basting this fabric to the foam. Okay, so now we're going to flip to the wrong side of the foam and just trim any overhang of the hexagons. Okay, so if you are going to have hexagons on both the front and the back of the pouch, you'll repeat this same process to attach more hexagons to the second foam main panel. I decided, so I wouldn't have to make so many hexagons, to have a solid fabric on my second foam main panel. So I repeated this process with basting this piece of, I decided to go with some natural cork with rainbow metallics sort of to match my hexagons, and so I attached the foam interfacing to the cork fabric in the same method that I just did, sewing around the perimeter using an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance with a lengthened stitch length of 4 millimeters. Okay, so now the exterior pieces are prepared. It's now time to sew the zipper in place. So first we need to trim the zipper to exactly 7 inches. I always like to measure in the center of the zipper, and the reason for that is I like to eliminate this metal zipper stop because that'll break a needle. And I also like to eliminate the front of the zipper, because where the zipper teeth end, that sort of creates sort of a weird gap over there. So I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to measure right in the middle of the zipper. Okay, and we need to measure 7 inches because that's what we'll be trimming the zipper to. So I'm going to make a marking on this end, and then where there's 7 inches, right over here as well. And I just happen to be using a really long zipper just because I was looking for a certain color and this is what I had in my stash. Okay, so this is 7 inches exactly. Yes. I'm going to create new bar tacks to create a new zipper stop. So I'm going to sew 1/8 of an inch to the inside of the markings that I made. I'm going to sew back and forth a few times. If you're using a zipper with metal teeth, you may consider either hand cranking back and forth or removing a few of the metal zipper teeth. And then I'm going to do the same thing for this end, except I need to make sure that zipper head is pulled in the middle of the 2 markings that I made. And when I go to sew this one, I'm going to use my fingers to pinch the zipper tape together. Same thing, I'm going to sew back and forth a few times to create a new zipper stop. Okay, so I turned my stitch length back to 2.5 millimeters because that's my usual. And then cut exactly on the lines that you drew. And then after cutting, that zipper should measure exactly 7 inches. Okay, now we're going to pull out the 2 zipper tabs. I'm going to flip to the wrong side of the fabric and we're going to press those wrong sides together in half so that both of the short ends meet. Okay, we're going to open the fabrics out and I'm going to press this short end in toward the center crease. And then same thing with the other short end. Again, in toward the center crease. And then I'm going to repress like that. Okay, now I'm going to take the zipper and I'm going to slide one end of the zipper inside the metal zipper tab, and it's going to hit that center crease over there and the zipper tape is going to be centered. So I'm going to refold that zipper tab and just place a wonder clip on either side, and same thing for this end as well. Again, that end of the zipper will hit that center crease and then I'll refold. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew on the fabric 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric to secure the zipper tab, and same thing on the opposite end as well. Okay, we're also going to trim the fabric so that it's even with the zipper tape. And same thing on the other side as well. Okay, so now we're going to attach the zipper to one of the main panels, and it doesn't matter which one you sew first. I'm going to flip the zipper so that it's face down. And the zipper needs to be centered, so you should see equal amounts of the fabric extending from either end. Okay, I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine, put the zipper foot on your machine, and we're going to sew from the tab to the other tab using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so again, that zipper foot's on my machine, and going forward, we're going to backstitch all of our seams at start and stop. Okay, as I approach that zipper head, I'm going to stop with the needle down, lift the presser foot up, and zip that zipper head out of the way, and then I can continue sewing. Okay, now we're going to add one of the lining main panels. So I'm going to flip this lining piece so that it's right sides together with the hexagons. So that means that zipper will be sandwiched in between. And I'm going to pin that top edge in place. Okay, so this time I'm actually going to be sewing from the wrong side of the exterior, because I can see my stitches from when I stitch the zipper to the exterior fabric. So basically we're going to be sewing from one tab to the other. If for some reason you can't see your stitches, we're going to be using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, and just remember you're not sewing all the way to the end. You're only sewing from one tab to the other. Okay, I feel that zipper head coming up, so again, I'm going to stop with the needle down, lift the presser foot, and unzip the zipper. Okay, I'm going to press the fabrics so that they're wrong sides together. Okay, and then I'm going to top stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the edge of the fabric, just from one tab to the other tab. And for any top stitching, I always like to swap out my zipper foot for my regular sewing machine foot, because it gives me a little bit of extra leverage for the top stitching. Okay, for the top stitching, I also lengthened my stitch length to 3 millimeters. Okay, now we're going to add the second exterior main panel. So I'm going to have that piece right side facing up, and I'm going to flip the zipper again so that it's face down, and the zipper should be centered on that exterior main panel. So you should see equal amounts of the fabric showing on either side. Okay, again, I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew the pinned edge using 1/4 of an inch seam allowance with the zipper foot back on the machine. Oops, you know what? I forgot to change back to my regular stitch length. If you forgot like I did, switch it back to 2.5 millimeters. Okay, now we're going to add the final lining main panel. So I'm going to flip it so that the fabric's face down. You want to see the wrong side of the zipper, and I'm going to pin it to that top edge. The zipper will be sandwiched in between. Okay, again, I'm going to flip to the wrong side of the foam piece, and I'm going to sew on top of my previous stitches. So I'm going to start sewing here where the tab starts and stop sewing over here. Again, with the zipper foot, it's 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, we're going to press those last two main panels so that they're wrong sides together. And you can go ahead and remove that zipper foot from your machine. We won't be needing it anymore. And just like before, we're going to top stitch from the tab to the tab using an 1/8 of an inch seam, and I'm going to lengthen my stitch length to 3 millimeters. Okay, so make sure the zipper's unzipped, and I'm going to bring both of the exterior fabrics so that they're right sides together, and I'm going to pin those in place. So the ends where we left unsewn, those are going to be left folded down on either end, and make sure that the lining fabric is pushed out of the way. Okay, we're going to take this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew the pinned edge using a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. So basically the sides and the bottom are going to be sewn, and again, make sure that the lining fabric is pushed out of the way. Okay, I have my stitch length turned back to my usual, which is 2.5 millimeters. Okay, we're going to repeat the same process for the lining, except we need to leave an opening for turning right side out. You may prefer to leave the opening on the side. I'm going to leave my opening right over here, and it's about 4 inches. Okay, so I'm going to pin the same way that I did with the exterior, have the top end of the lining sort of folded down. And same thing as with the exterior, while we're sewing, we're not going to sew through the zipper tab, we're just sewing right to the side of it. Okay, and again, we're not sewing through any exterior fabric. Make sure that exterior is pushed out of the way. Okay, again, we're going to use a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so this time I'm going to sew from the opening toward the corner, and then same thing, come back the other side of the opening toward the corner. I just found for the lining I had an easier time sewing those top corners if I sewed it this way. Okay, so anywhere where there's a curved edge, I'm going to take my scissors and cut little V's about halfway into the seam allowance, and the V's help the fabric turn nice and neat when pressing. So the nice thing about this pouch is that you can use a variety of different interfacings. If your machine doesn't handle thick layers well, you might consider using either batting or fusible fleece. And not necessary to use foam because this is a flat project. You don't need the foam for the added structure, so a thinner interfacing is certainly perfectly fine to use. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing with the lining. Okay, now it's time to pull everything out through the opening in the lining. Okay, so I'm just going to use a turning tool. I'm using this precision turning tool to poke out the corners so that my zipper ends look really nice. And I noticed when I was making this smaller project that the cork and the foam made everything really thick. So if you're using cork, you might want to consider skipping the foam just so you have a bit of an easier time. All right, so to close the opening, you can either close the opening by hand or by machine. So I'm going to press this opening toward the wrong side by about 1/4 inch. Same thing on the other side. And then I'm going to put some wonder clips on these edges to hold them together. So you can either machine stitch the opening using 1/8 inch seam allowance, just where the opening is, or since you've had some practice with the hand sewing, you can close this opening by hand using a slip stitch. It's up to you. Either method will work for finishing that opening. Thanks so much for sewing along with me. I can't wait to see your finished pouch. Be sure to join my Facebook group and share a photograph of your finished project there. And remember, if I can do it, so can you.